Hello, everyone. I am Dima Ghawi, and I'm so excited to be with you today. We're going to talk about creating a culture of inclusion. After the murder of George Floyd last year, so many organizations started opening their eyes and realizing the value of diversity and inclusion. The challenge is many of them, they didn't know where to start and what to do. And most of the time, they were very reactive. Whenever I meet with executives that want to want to start implementing initiatives focused on diversity and inclusion, they automatically ask me, how is this good for the organization? How is it going to help the bottom line? How is it going to help attract talent and engage the millennials? And of course, there's so much research out there that talks about the benefits of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And to me, it is so much more than that. And I want to start by sharing with you a story. One of my friends, he has a nephew. The nephew is 13 years old, and his name is Jeff. So Jeff, over the last couple of years, started gaining a lot of weight. And his uncle was not comfortable to ask him, like, what's going on? And maybe you should do something about it. But what he realized that his nephew started wearing a heavy winter jacket all year long. And they live in Louisiana. So if you've ever been to Louisiana in the hot summer and the humidity, you would never ever imagine somebody wearing a heavy winter jacket. So one day the uncle was talking with Jeff and he said, Jeff, I've been gaining weight. Maybe you and I can encourage each other and go to the gym. And the nephew responded and he said, I totally understand how most likely you don't feel comfortable. Me too. When I go to school, the students are making fun of me. My classmates, they laugh about me behind my back, and I feel so uncomfortable even going to school. So I found a trick, and the trick is my jacket. I wear this jacket all the time, hoping that by doing that, I'm going to hide my body and people would not see my weight. They would leave me alone and they would not make fun of me. So can you imagine how many individuals show up at work in our community wearing an invisible heavy jacket to hide part of who they are, just to be accepted, and so they would not be discriminated against or laughed at or put down. So that's, to me, that's why I believe this topic is so important. It's important to create a safe environment for everybody to show up at work and to show up in our community and be themselves, be their wonderful self, to feel safe, to bring creativity and ideas that otherwise they would not. So I want you to think about that throughout the presentation. Let's go ahead and start. Though, if you leave with one message today, I want you to think about being intentional in being curious, courageous, and committed. And this is so important. So curiosity, learning more about ourselves, learning about our biases, learning about others and their stories, their beliefs, which is so interesting, but also courage to drive change and also to be an ally and committed. So it's not like you're going to be watching this right now and feel motivated for today and then you may forget about it tomorrow. No, this is going to require commitment for the rest of our lives. And that is so important. So now, whenever we talk about diversity, a lot of individuals automatically think about race and gender. But as you see from this slide, there's so many different dimensions for diversity. It is much, much bigger. And when you see this, you'll realize that we're all diverse, regardless of our background and gender and ethnicity and religion and geographic location. We are all diverse and we're bringing different views to where we are, to our community and our work. And I love this slide with the puzzles because the puzzle is showing diversity, which is mainly we're looking different. We're putting people from different backgrounds all together. That is not the only goal. The goal is inclusion. Inclusion is when we're everybody coming together and creating something bigger than themselves. And that is so important. And that's when we're talking about belonging and safety and all of these wonderful things. So now, how do we do that? How do we create a culture of inclusion? So I'm going to share with you 4 steps. The first one is executive buy-in. It is so important to ensure that the executive team are on board and they understand the value of creating an inclusive work culture. Again, there's so much research out there that shows how teams overperform, they're more creative, the organization is so much more competitive when there's a focus on diversity and inclusion. And whenever we're working on initiatives to create an inclusive culture, that's going to require time. That's going to require investment. And that's why we need to ensure that the executive team are on board and they truly believe in the value that these initiatives bring to the organization. But also, they're going to be facing resistance. Some team members may still not want a diverse and inclusive culture. I know this may sound so shocking, but I realize from the companies I work with, about 20% of the employees, it just keeps coming, about 20% that they feel now this is going to be taking away something from them, or now there's going to be reverse discrimination. That is not true, but that's why we need the executive team to be on board and to believe in this. Now, the second one is to understand the organization's current state. So we can't just go implement initiatives and we don't even know what we're dealing with. So that's why sending out a survey to gather information from the team related to, do they feel a sense of belonging? Do they feel that their manager values inclusion? That is so important. And I have a whole list of questions to ask in the survey. So if anyone is interested, just email me. After the presentation, I'll include my contact information for you to have. So to gather that, but whenever we are doing these survey and whenever we're capturing information from the team, it's important to look into all of these areas. The work culture, the leadership team, do they demonstrate value for diversity and inclusion? Is there discrimination and bias within the organization? How is the value related to inclusion being communicated internally, externally? So all of these areas are so important for us to capture information and to analyze them. And when I mention analyze them, it is not just to look at the full number where we would say, oh, for example, 90% of our employees feel included. That is not enough because we need to go into the details of the demographics. How are, for example, men responding different than women? How are individuals of color responding differently than an individual who is white? And here are some examples that I want to share with you. So this is one of the questions for the survey that looked into if the employees feel that they have equitable opportunities for professional development and advancement. And look how the numbers are different in terms of the responses. 81% of men in that organization felt that they have equitable opportunities for advancement, while only 66% or 67% of women felt the same way. So that shows that there's a gap that needs to be addressed. Now, same exact question, individuals that are white, 71%, they felt that they have equitable opportunities for advancement, while only 48% of individuals of color felt that they have equitable opportunities. So that's something that we need to look into and read between the lines and the details within these numbers. So now, once we get the leadership team's approval, once we analyze the organization and get better sense of what are the gaps, what are the challenges, what is going well, that's when we need to start focusing on awareness and dialogue. And of course, we do that through training. A lot of companies, they have employee resource groups where they're bringing the employees together and getting to talk about important topics related to inclusion, related to understanding the experiences that different groups within the organization deal with, and learning more about that. What I want to share with you today is about unconscious bias. So, when we're talking about awareness and whenever we talk about dialogue, it's so important for us to pause and realize that we all have biases. Some people, they're aware of their biases, while all of us, we have these unconscious biases, and a lot of it can also be called implicit bias, where we have these biases at the back of our mind that are shortcuts, making quick decisions for us, and we're not even realizing it. So think of an example where you may have you may be very busy, so much on your plate, you're trying to drive from your home to work, and then you start the car, and then suddenly you arrive and you don't remember that you stopped at a stop sign or you took a ride or any of those. You don't remember them because your brain was making all of the decisions on your behalf. And the goal of your brain is to keep, or our brain is to keep us all safe. But the problem with that is we're not even realizing what we're doing. And that could be a bias trap that we're going to talk about. Scientists found that our brain receives 11 million bits of information each second. Can you imagine? I don't even know how they calculated that, but 11 million bits of information. Our brain, consciously, we're not going to be able to process all of that. We only can process 40 of those 11 million. So can you imagine how much is happening in the background based on our programming, the stories we were told about others, our own experiences, the media, and what is the media is telling us about individuals that are different than us from different groups. So that's why we need to talk about that. So now, before going into major scientific terms, think of our brain as if we have a slow brain and we have also a fast brain. So the fast brain is the one that's making all of these quick decisions on our behalf. They're even though they're trying to protect us, but they're a bias trap. That's when we're going to talk about some examples related to that. That's when we're quickly making assumptions about others, and we have stereotypes because that's what our brain is already programmed about these other people. While the slow brain is the one that is questioning and asking, why do I like people that are similar to me and I don't like others that are not? Why do I like to hire individuals that may remind me of myself when I was their age? It's truly it's pausing and thinking about the decisions and the interactions that we have with others. We have over 180 biases. Can you imagine? Today, we're going to talk about 4 of those, but imagine how many biases we have. And that's why we need to realize that, of course, we all have biases, but it is going to require a commitment from us for the rest of our lives to become more and more aware, but also to do something about them. So here's a funny little thing. So 2 truths and a lie. Biases impact our behavior and choices. We don't have biases because we're bad people. We have them because we're people, and we can eliminate all of our unconscious biases. So go ahead and in the chat, enter which one you think is the lie. It is number 3, because as I mentioned earlier, we cannot eliminate them. We have so many of them, and that's why it's going to require for us to be intentional. And definitely they affect our behavior. That's why we're talking about it. And it's not that we're bad people. We just need to do something about it. Okay, and here's another 2 truths and a lie for you. Which one you think is the lie? So the first one is unconscious bias are activated outside our control and without our consent. They are aligned with our beliefs. Detecting bias is tricky because we confuse our initial reaction with insight. So which one do you think is the lie? And as you are typing, I'll go ahead and share some information here. So unconscious bias are activated outside of our control. Absolutely. That's why we're not even aware that we're having these biases. So definitely that's a truth. They're aligned with our beliefs. And that's the lie. The lie is number two. They are not aligned with our beliefs because we may be very kind and loving and welcoming to others, but we still have the biases based on what we were told as we were young, what certain experiences, what the media is feeding us. So we may be acting in a way that we don't realize that we even have biases and they affect our behavior. And then the third one, detecting bias, is tricky because we confuse our initial reaction with insight. So we may say, I have a gut feeling about this person, or I'm not comfortable with this individual. I don't know why. So it's not like we have psychic abilities. I think a lot of us, we don't have psychic abilities. So our gut feeling, it's not that we may know something about a person. It could be so much linked to a specific bias that we have. So now imagine a person in a leadership role. What physical characteristics do you first thing that comes to your mind? So go ahead in the chat and enter what is the first thing that comes to your mind about the physical characteristic of an individual in leadership. And as you're doing that, I will share with you the next thing is a survey of Fortune 500 CEOs found out that on average, they are 6 feet tall, which is approximately 2.5 inches taller than the average American man. Isn't that interesting? Do you think when they were doing the hiring, they were looking for somebody who is qualified with the right education, right experience, and they also had in the job description 6 feet and taller? Or do you think we have a bias where we automatically assume in our brain, without us realizing, that an individual who is taller is more qualified or somebody that we can follow, somebody we can trust? Even in our language, we say things like, I look up to someone or I look down at someone. These things happen all the time. And then the gender bias. Do you think there's any correlation between a woman's weight and her ability to lead? First thing that comes to your mind. Some of you may say, oh no, there's no correlation. But that is your slow brain thinking. The fast brain may say something different. They did some kind of activity with 500 hiring professionals, and they showed them women from different body weights. And only 18% of these hiring professionals said that the heaviest looking women have leadership potential. And this happens a lot without us even realizing. And then individuals of color. So the lighter their skin color, the more likely they are to get hired, promoted, mentored, become CEOs, and make more money. And they're more likely to be invited to go out with their friends. Again, we're not even realizing that we do these things, but it happens all the time. And I'm going to share with you an example that happened to me. So I am so focused on the advancement of women in leadership. I love to teach individuals about diversity, inclusion, working on employee engagement, but I mess up all the time too, because I have my biases as well. So I graduated from the University of San Diego with my master's in business. And few years ago, they reached out to me and asked me to give a commencement address. Of course, I felt so happy that I was going to go back to my university and empower the graduating class. I was asked to be there early, an hour early. And then I was going to meet the dean, who was going to introduce me to Provost Baker. So easy. So I flew from New Orleans to San Diego. I was there earlier than an hour in this huge space that can hold over 5,000 people. I met the dean and he said, come on, let me introduce you to Provost Baker. So in big space, there were only 4 people. So the dean, myself, and then 2 people on the stage wearing the cap and gown, like PhD cap and gown. So one is a white man and the other is a black woman. So I walked to the white man and I said, hello, Provost Baker. I am Dima. And I said it with so much pride. And everybody paused and they said, he's not Provost Baker. She is Provost Baker. And poor woman, she gave a look like, oh, here we go again. Isn't that interesting? That, again, I believe in the advancement of women in leadership. I love anything related to diversity and inclusion and teaching people about it. But I also have my own bias traps. When I heard a provost, I didn't think of a Black woman. The first thing that came to my mind is a white man. And that's something we need to become more aware of, catch ourselves. Of course, I felt so embarrassed, but I learned a very valuable lesson that all of us, hopefully, we can learn from that as well. So we don't have these biases because we're bad. We have them because we're people. And we need to keep realizing that. And of course, we need to realize, ask ourselves, why do we tend to hire candidates that are similar to us? Why? How do these biases affect us in our work? And what are some of the things we can do in order to address these biases? We're not going to have them, we're not going to conquer them, but we can manage them. And that's why it's important. So let's talk about 4 of our biases so we can learn more about ourselves. And that's part of the reason I love this topic. It is a lot of self-discovery. It's a lot of psychology, learning about ourselves and others. So the first one is affinity bias. So affinity bias means that we tend to like people that are similar to us without even realizing it. So think about the closest people to you, your circle of trust, that are not family members. So your friends, your individuals that you trust the most. Think about 7 to 10 of these people. How do they tend to look? Do they look similar to you? Do they tend to have similar political views, religious beliefs? Do they tend to have similar socioeconomic status? So if the answer is yes, which most of the time it is, that means we all have affinity bias, where we're bringing people to our trust circle that are similar to us. The problem with this is, first, we're not learning about others that are different, and we're not challenging our thinking and our beliefs. But also in the work environment, this happens all the time, where hiring managers tend to hire individuals that are very similar to them. And they tend to, without even realizing it. I work with organizations that say, oh, we hire people just based on their qualifications. We don't care of their gender or ethnicity or religion. We just care about if they can do the job. And then I ask them, show me the demographics of everybody you hired and promoted the last 5 years. And guess how the demographics look like? They tend to be very similar. And so that is affinity bias. So we need to be careful about that. The second one is guilty by association, where we think of a group and without us realizing, if we meet an individual that belongs to that group, we automatically have assumptions and stereotypes about that person. So you by now most likely you've heard my accent. I'm originally Middle Eastern. I've been in the US for 25 years, but I've had situations where people would say, oh, you don't look like a terrorist. So they automatically assume or link Middle Eastern person with a terrorist group. And that is just so horrible, but it happens all the time. And this is happening a lot this year with the Asian hate, where individuals, just the fact that they look Asian, they have to deal with a lot of racism and discrimination and all kinds of things that we need to be aware of. And this is reflected into even the names of individuals. So if you look at this slide, and do you think Muhammad or Michael, they have better chance of being invited to a first interview? And if your answer is Michael, that's true, because most of the time individuals even have biases related to a name, and they have assumptions about people just based on the name. So that's why many people from minority groups, they end up changing their names. They end up changing their resume, taking out anything that show that they belong to a group, and try to make themselves as sound as white as possible. And it's called whitewashing. And then the next one is conformity bias. And this is so horrible because this way everybody thinks the same, and diversity of thought is not being appreciated. Everybody would assume that if others think a certain way, that they need to follow their path. They should not challenge the norm. And I see a lot of organizations that don't value inclusion. They have a lot of these biases. So if you look here about groupthink, of course, we don't want groupthink. How can we be creative and come up with new ideas if we have everybody thinking the same way, and the ones that have ideas don't feel safe to come up and share them? So now I want you to think about, how do you believe these biases affect us in the workplace? So go ahead in the chat and enter it. I'm very curious to learn about what you think related to this. And of course, we need to think about what are the initiatives that we need to do in order to tackle them, to tackle the biases, to increase awareness, to increase dialogue. And it needs to be part of our recruitment. So educate the recruitment team about the value of inclusion, our biases, so they would be careful to have paths for feedback to the leadership team, but also to the employees, mentorship programs, looking into the advancement and who we are promoting, and why are we promoting certain individuals and not others. So if you look at this slide, it includes really a summary of everything we talked about: getting executive buy-in, looking at the culture and understanding where we are, increasing awareness, creating a safe space, but also implementing these important initiatives in order for us to focus on creating an inclusive cultures. So now let me share with you some actions we can take. And I would love for you to enter in the chat what are actions you are taking in order to manage your biases and also to create an inclusive culture. The first one, increasing awareness and being so intentional. That's why when we need to start asking ourselves questions, why do I tend to like to work with certain groups of people and not others? Why is my circle of trust all looking the same? It's truly challenging our thinking and our beliefs. Now, the other one is engaging our slow brain. And now you know about the fast and the slow brain. So becoming more aware of that we tend to think fast and have stereotypes, but what can we do to engage the slow brain? And it is by asking ourselves questions, to recognize that our perception may not be other people's reality. And that is so important. And everything we talked about today goes back to curiosity, courage, and commitment. Realize that it has a powerful ripple effect where we allow, by changing ourselves, by being more curious, courageous, and committed, we're giving a space for everybody to come to our world and feel safe. So young Jeff, who's 13 years old, doesn't have to wear his heavy winter jacket all year long. He can take it off, and everybody that we interact with can feel safe to take off their invisible heavy jacket and be themselves. This is my contact information. If you would like to get access to more details and blogs and link to the survey questions that I mentioned earlier, just send me an email and I would love to share it with you. It was a pleasure presenting. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference.